Welcome to Exploring A Course in Miracles. I'm Emily Perry with the Circle of Atonement, and I'm here with Circle founder Robert Perry. And today we're talking about karma. Karma is, to put it very simply, the connection between actions and their consequences. We say that good intentions and good behaviors contribute to good karma, and bad intentions and bad behaviors contribute to bad karma. And because of this, oftentimes we'll use karma in an attempt to explain how present circumstances could have been caused by actions of the past. If you're mean to your dog, for example, in the morning, and then on your way to work, you get a flat tire, could it be that bad karma is what caused your flat tire? What many of us find interesting about karma from a spiritual perspective is that karmic actions are associated with our current life, but karma has, of course, also been tied to past lives and reincarnation. So, in other words, things that happen to us in our current life are influenced by a past that we're not even aware of. Our complete and annotated edition of A Course in Miracles references karma or karmic 6 times, and it has a section in it called The Question of Karma. And so today we're going to discuss what specifically the Course teaches on this topic. And I know we're really excited about this conversation because there's some really good stuff in here on this topic. Before we get into what the Course says about the topic of karma, we should mention that the section of the text I just referenced, the question of karma, has quite a backstory. It does not appear in Helen's notes. It does not appear in the draft of the Course that Helen typed up with Bill Thetford, which we call the text. So what can you tell us about how this section, the question of karma, appears in the CE?
Well, it is in Helen's notes. It's just not in the available copy of Helen's notes. It was stuck in one of her notebooks, loose leaf. So those pages, I'm sure for that reason, didn't get copied into the copy of her notes that's in the Library of Congress that we all have access to. I would dearly love to see the original handwritten version. All we have is his transcription that Ken Wapnick did in Absence from Felicity. They aren't dated. We can't vouch entirely for the accuracy of that transcription, but where we've placed them in the CE, I'm virtually positive is roughly where they fell. And the reason I say that is because there's this really fascinating characteristic of the dictation of the Course where it's like a moving stream, and at any point along that any point along that stream is unique. So at any point in time when he's dictating to Helen, whether it's for the Course or personal dictation, there is a collection of themes that is present only at that point in time. And as the dictation moves on, at each point, there's a new collection of themes present. So at this point in the dictation, in the question of karma section, we see certain themes like guilt feelings and symbols of the ego. And, there's a bunch of themes like that we see. And sure enough, if you look for that collection of themes, it's in the middle of chapter 5 in the text and nowhere else. So we stuck it there, confident that that's roughly the time in which it was received.
So you don't think that this section on karma was intentionally left out? There was a lot of material that was cut from the Course or omitted altogether. You think that it was just a mistake? It was that Helen wrote it on something loose and it fell out, and that's that.
Well, to be honest, I think it was intentionally left out. It's the kind of material that you just know they're going to cut. It's talking
Mm-hmm.
about something in the world, it's talking about karma, it's talking about past life readings. It also, we've edited it, but the original version of the discourse includes direct comments about Helen's scribing, how it has improved, how it needs to be edited, things that really, they should be in a cameo, and they are in our cameo. I think it's 19, the editing of the Course. So those personal comments and comments about things in the world, like belief in karma, past life readings, that's the stuff that,
The very
if you
thing they
know,
would have cut.
is the very stuff they would have cut and routinely did.
Okay. So just to get started here, let's get into the traditional or the popular view of karma versus the Course's view.
Yeah, I mean, I think in a discussion like this, one would be tempted to go and delve deeply into ancient Indian concepts of karma, what Shankara said or somebody else said. And the Course is not referencing that. It's referencing, the popular conception. Okay. And the popular conception is that our lives and our character are a product of the past, and particularly past lives. And as you said, like, good choices in the past lead to good stuff now. Bad choices lead to bad stuff. And in the ancient Hindu philosophy, the law is an impersonal law of cause and effect. It's like the bad actions cause bad future outcomes. Uh, but it's not hard it's hard not to have somewhere in your mind some tinge of, it's not just an automatic law, it's like payback, right? It feels, as you talk about karma, it feels like there's a payback, a punishment element for the bad choices of the past. I don't think that's part of the original philosophy, but that's part of what our minds sort of reference or associate to with the idea. I think for a lot of us, the idea of karma and reincarnation was really pivotal in my spiritual journey. And I think that's true for a great many of us. It seems so valuable because it explains things, right? It's like, why is my lifetime like this? Why did I get stuck with that family? Like, well, there's an explanation. It wasn't just out of the blue, wasn't just I lost, God's just playing roulette up there, and oops, the ball bounced into the wrong place. There's an explanation. And it also provides a sense of, there's a fairness, where actions of mine in the present, that, like, a lot of rewards in this world come in response to bad actions, right? There's a quote from, I think, a French writer, a Spanish writer, where he said, behind every great fortune is a great crime. And, that goes against the idea of The Secret, where if you have a great fortune, it's because you know the secret. Like, that's a real world view, where a lot of times you amass the treasures of this world through corrupt action. And karma says, yeah, but just wait. It'll all balance out in the end, and the scales will balance and you'll pay. So I think a lot of our attraction to it is this explanatory factor and the fairness idea.
Mm-hmm. Well, we'll get into all of that deeper as we go along, but just to continue to set the table here, I think it's important for students to note that in the course, well, let me put it this way. In the course, karma is always connected to reincarnation. And so when you're talking about karma, from a course perspective, you're also talking about reincarnation. So can you say a bit more about that connection?
Yeah, and I think this, like, karma has taken on, it's become like an English word, really, and it has a popular meaning. But I think back in the 60s, when this material was dictated, um, karma and reincarnation were like two sides of one coin, right? So there are times when Jesus said karmic to Helen and Bill, and karmic meant past life. So bad karmic choices meant bad past life choices. And whenever he talks about it, you can tell there is this sense of, we're heading out before your previous lifetime. So is that what you were wanting
Well,
to?
so the fact that karma in the course is associated with past lives is a validation of the fact that, from a course perspective at least, there are past lives. So that's a big open question for many people in spirituality. It's certainly not something that we dealt with when I was growing up in the Christian church. You have this
Right.
life, and what you do in this
Right.
life determines what happens in the next life. But this whole idea of do we have past lives is endlessly fascinating to people. And the question of whether or not we do seems to be settled in the Course. He says he acknowledges the existence of past lives, but then says he doesn't want to spend a whole lot of time on it.
It's
So do
more
you want
than
to say more
that.
about that?
Yeah, it's more than he acknowledges it and doesn't want to spend time on it. He says in that question of karma section that the whole concept is not necessary to religion at all, like not even just the Course. In the manual for teachers in section 24 is Reincarnation. So he basically says, do not teach reincarnation as part of this course. So it's not a formal part of the Course. He says it's not necessary to religion in general. However, it's pretty clear he references it. So he's dancing, he's kind of, on both sides of the fence here at once. And we're going to see that throughout our conversation. He has really strong, well thought through reasons for being on both sides of the fence.
All right. I'm tempted to get into those right now, but we'll go through in a
Yeah.
logical flow. All right. So let's talk about some associations that we have with karma and the Course's view of things. So when we think about karma, oftentimes we think about the idea that we were mistreated, we got mistreated in the past, and that's why we are the way we are now. And the Course has some very specific things to say about this idea that we'll get into. So, what do you want to say about that?
Yeah, I think when we think about past lives, we probably tend to think more in terms of the bad choices we made. But I do think that there's also this sense of what was done to me in the past. And Jesus links that with delving into our childhood for what was done to us in childhood. And so there's this place in chapter 3 in the CE, the essential goal of therapy, where basically he says that, you know, don't delve into your childhood and what was done to you for an explanation of who you are now. And he has the same attitude towards past lives. So early in the dictation, in what's now chapter 1, this is not in the CE proper. It's not in the cameos. It's buried in Helen's notes. He basically says, it's not dangerous, and we'll talk more about this issue later on. It's not dangerous to find out who you were in the past, as long as you remember that you never suffered because of what someone else did. So he's concerned that we delve into our past in this life or our past in other lives and have this view of what got done to me that explains who I am.
And that is so much of traditional psychotherapy. And it's so much of our general conversation about why we are the way we are. Well, this thing happened to me in the past. And so that explains my behavior in the present. And I know you want to talk about this quote a little later, but it's so good. It's worth bringing up now. In the question of karma section, it says patients in psychotherapy frequently go over their childhoods in some detail and at considerable expense, and it merely encourages their egos to become more tolerable to them. I would hardly want you to repeat that same error. And then he goes on to say, are you interested in healing your insanity or studying its past? And that does tend to be how we approach so much of what we call healing, where it's like, we need to delve into the past. My parents did this to me. This thing happened to me. And therefore, that's why I behave the way that I behave. And what he says here about the ego becoming more tolerable, that's it. Because when you say, well, I'm angry because my dad was angry, well, you just made your ego more tolerable. You're explaining it away and expecting the other person to say, oh, okay, I get it. But you're still
Right.
behaving the same way. You're not actually healing that anger. You're just explaining why you have it.
Right. And it's it's just a few words, but we see this where maybe you've got a nasty ego, but now that ego's off the hook because somebody else caused it in you. So hey, you're innocent.
Right. Do you want to say more about that? It's so good.
I feel like we should, but I feel like we can't just because we have so
Okay.
much more to say.
All right. So let's go into the karmic idea that we've done bad things in the past, and those things come back to us in what feels like punishment. So when bad things happen to us, we'll often hear, well, karma's a bitch and this kind of thing. So what do you want to say about that?
Yeah, I think here is where the word karma is used to express a universal human view, right? In Christianity, we have as you sow, so shall ye reap. Um, I remember back when the tsunami happened in Indonesia in 2004. Local people were like, well, the Mother Earth is angry at us. So whatever your belief system is, this is part of like the architecture of the human mind. And the course is really
Pat
clear.
Robertson's explanation of September 11th
Yeah, something to do with gay people.
was God's retribution for the progressive ideals of LGBTQIA acceptance. And that was
Yeah,
karmic retribution from God. Yeah.
right. So here, the word just stands in for something just about every human mind is carrying. And the Course emphatically rejects this idea. It does not believe that we actually sinned in the past, and that those sins are going to catch up with us in the form of hurtful circumstances in this life. In fact, there's a great place in chapter 3 of the CE that mentions karma. So he quotes, "Vengeance is mine, saith the Lord," from the Old Testament, and then says it's a strictly karmic viewpoint. It is a real misperception of truth by which you assign your own evil past to God. And then he says God does not believe in karmic retribution at all. So the Course flatly denies that this is how the universe works, even though we all assume somewhere in our minds that it works that way.
Yeah, we're conditioned to think that way so often. But man, there's something so freeing in that idea. Like we could let go of, oh, this bad thing happened to me because of some bad thing that I did. If we can just eradicate that view in our mind, we would free up so much real estate in there for other
Yeah.
things,
Yeah.
because
And
that is something that we carry. That's an albatross for so many people, that guilt of I did something bad and either this thing happened because of it, or you're waiting for something bad to happen because of something you did bad in the past.
yeah, we need freedom from that.
We do. Okay. So then there is a kind of psychological version of this in the course where we're not sort of waiting for this external punishment to come to us, but we punish ourselves. So say more about that.
Yeah, there is this view, and you see it throughout the course. It's especially strong, I would say, in chapters 27 and 28 in the text. But the view is that somewhere in our unconscious, we carry enormous guilt for our past mistakes, for the things that we did and thought that were hurtful. Uh, and then we believe we should receive payback for those things. God doesn't believe that. Okay, that's not his system, but we believe that. And out of that belief, somewhere deep in our unconscious mind, we dream this dream of our world. It's a collective dream, but we dream our part in it. We dream our life. And so that dream comes out of this sense of guilt. And so our lives become a series of, instances of payback for what we've done in the past. This person deserts us. This illness befalls us. This calamity happens to us. This relationship goes south. It looks all random to us. Looked at through the eyes of karma, we say, well, there's some kind of payback happening. Karma's a bitch. But the Course is saying is that we falsely believe in our guilt and therefore unnecessarily dream into our life circumstances payback for that guilt. It's really self-punishment, and it's self-punishment based on the false idea that we have sinned. So it looks like karma. It looks like the usual idea, but it's something very different going on.
There's a whole workshop in that idea that what we think of as external punishment is really what's going on in our own mind, where we're punishing ourselves. We feel guilty about our own past lovelessness, and that's what's really going on here.
Right. Yeah. And when
But
just as an aside, when the Course says the secret of salvation is but this, that you are doing this unto yourself, it's referring to that. What you are doing unto yourself is all that stuff the world seems to be doing to you. You're the
yeah,
puppeteer.
and again, there's something liberating about that too, because if you're the one who's causing all of these bad things to happen to you, then you're the one who can stop it by choosing again. So I know we're going to get into that, but I just want to say something or give a quote here that comes from what you were just saying. Um, if we can eradicate this idea that God is coming to punish us, or bad things are coming in our life to punish us because of our bad misdeeds of the past, then again, there's just something so freeing about that. And there's a quote here that I love in Miracle Principle 16 that says, "You who live so close to God must not give way to guilt. The karmic law demands abandonment for abandoning, but you have received mercy, not justice." And in the Course, this idea of justice is love. So the Course's view of justice, and we think karma is justice, but the Course's view of justice is love. You've received mercy, not justice.
As we think of
So
justice.
right. That's just such a cool idea, because we do think the karmic law is abandoning for abandonment, an eye for an eye. You hit me, I'm going to hit you back harder. That's our karmic cycle. But the Course comes along and says, you can wash all of that away. I didn't come to abandon you. I came to give you mercy, not what you think of as justice. So beautiful idea.
Yeah.
Okay. So on the positive side of karma, we keep talking about bad deeds causing bad things. On the positive side of karma, what about the idea that our good choices can cultivate certain good qualities and abilities within ourselves, and those things stay with us from lifetime to lifetime? The Course does have some things to say about that as well.
Yeah. So the idea that the bad stuff, catches up with us and we have to face the payback, the chickens come home to roost. The Course says that doesn't happen. Okay. But it does say that with those past choices, you were cultivating within yourself certain qualities, certain abilities. That happens. Okay. So when it, for instance, reinterprets the biblical statement that as you sow, so shall you reap, it says it's not about punishment. It's about what you consider worth cultivating in yourself, you will cultivate. So, and cultivation is a farming word, just as sowing and reaping are farming terms. And so the Course acts like, and Jesus in things that aren't in the Course act like, that those choices carry through in the form of our current personality traits. He traced Helen and Bill's personality traits back to karmic choices. Our abilities, he traced Helen's ability to hear his voice and scribe and basically serve as a sort of priestess. He traced that back to ancient times, a long series of her lifetimes. It carries through in the form of our relationships, the state of our relationships. He traced the current state of their relationship back to past lives, as well as our life circumstances. And we'll talk about that in a bit. But this is a side that the Course acts like is real. When you make those choices, you were choosing essentially what sort of person you wanted to be. And that does carry through, and it doesn't end at the death of a particular body.
Mm. Oh, that is so good. I'm tempted to dive into the idea that Helen and Bill were with each other in past lives and made choices together, and that their bond continued in previous lifetimes, this one, and presumably future ones. That's an amazing idea in and of itself.
Yeah.
But getting back to the fact that Helen and Bill's personality traits could be traced to karmic choices. There's a passage about that we wanted to read. So do you want to read it or do you want me to?
Go ahead. Go ahead.
Okay. So this is from the notes, correct?
Yes.
And it says, quote, tell Bill he is right in providing you with the consistent strength you need to get and he needs to offer. Your instability and his weakness have resulted from bad karmic choices, and your relationship now is crucial for the future. You must both exert every effort to restore it to what it once was. Both of you are correcting where you have failed before. This has already enabled you to fill a very unexpected role in your joint salvation and the salvation of many other children I will entrust increasingly to you. Amazing passage. You want to say
Yeah.
more about it?
Well, I think this fits into how so many of us have learned to see the whole idea of karma from other teachings, right? You make these choices in the dim past and you don't remember that past, but the effects of those choices are still carrying through. For Helen, those effects include her being such an unstable person where she's swinging all over the place in her state of mind. Um, for their relationship was so flawed because they had failed before on the level of that relationship. So there is this river, and we only see a certain part of the river that starts at our birth in this lifetime. But the river's been flowing for a long time, and the choices we made, around the bend before the river got to this spot are still with us. And that's part of the course's view. That's not something we need to like get free of. That's how it actually works.
And then there's the idea that they're making choices and those choices affect everything. So we were all familiar with the line in the course, trials are but lessons presented once again. So where you made a faulty choice before, you can make a better one. Students tend to know that part of the quote. But then it goes on to say, and thus escape all pain that what you chose before has brought you. And so, in terms of life circumstances, the course acknowledges that our past mistakes set us up to receive certain lessons in the present. And that was certainly true with Helen and Bill.
Right. And this is an explanation where it's not just our personality characteristics and our abilities and our relationships, it's everything that happens in our lives does have its roots in what we did before, and the difficulties now trace back to mistakes we made before. But there's a crucial difference, because generally there's this idea of, okay, I'm paying for it, right? This is kind of like my punishment. I'm paying for it. And by the suffering I do right now, I like evacuate that bad karma. And the course just doesn't have that view at all. You're not paying, and by suffering, you don't do anything. Nothing good happens just through your suffering. The idea is that in your current difficulties, the past mistakes you did have come back to you not as payment, but as this wonderful opportunity to make a different choice. So this is where that famous line comes from, in the course of choose once again. Like, the idea is you're facing those past mistakes now, and ideally you choose again so that this time you learn the lesson. And that's different than I can just like take my licks and the karma's paid off, right? You have to, the whole notion is to choose better, to choose love where before you chose hate.
Right, and he's constantly saying that throughout the course. I know he says it in the question of karma section. I just can't find it, where he's like, forget about this interval from when you separated to now. It doesn't matter. What matters is the choices that you're making in this moment. So the course has this fascinating teaching about undoing past mistakes where you don't pay for the past, you only give love where before you gave hate. And that erases that mistake, that lovelessness from your mind. So your current loving acts have the ability, from a course perspective, to erase past lovelessness. And a classic example of this is the Shield report. Many students here at the Circle are very familiar with that, where Helen rewrote a grant request for a colleague who had done a very poor job. And because Helen wrote the report well, they secured the funding to help developmentally disabled children. And in the course, Jesus says that this is an example of where Helen gave love to erase what he called an interval of darkness, which we assume is a past life, where she had hated and hurt the children, quote unquote. And so whereas now she's giving love, it erases that interval of darkness where she hated and hurt the children. So what do you want to say about that idea?
Well, yeah, that's a great idea that is different than what we might assume or how we might interpret that. The notion that we carry typically is there's this ledger somewhere, right? This karmic ledger in the Akashic records, maybe. And by doing good now, I like pay off that bad. What he's really saying is that somewhere in Helen's mind, in like a conscience that traverses lifetimes, she is carrying as a black mark that she hated and hurt the children, 3,000 years ago or whenever that was. She's still carrying that as a weight on her conscience. And then when she gives love to the children in the present, that thing in her conscience lifts. It's not that she's paying off karma, it's that she is doing the opposite of the thing she's been carrying regret over unconsciously. And by doing the opposite, that thing disappears from her burdened conscience.
And that's incredible. I mean, number one, that you can show love in the present and it eradicates mistakes of the past, not only just your immediate past, but maybe lifetimes past. That reminds me of the part in the notes where Louis is not feeling well, he's sleeping, and Jesus connects it to guilt that he felt over past life transgressions. Now, we all know what it's like to feel sleepy and take a nap, but we don't associate this with past life transgressions. And so I don't think there's a lot to say about that other than how much are we actually carrying from
Well,
our past into this life.
that's really instructive, because Helen is praying for him, and she's clear that her prayer is basically channeled. So the prayer is coming from Jesus, and they're praying it together. And he wasn't just sleepy, he was out of sorts. He felt disequilibrium. Okay. And so in her prayer, she says, you should stop punishing yourself for the Alexandrian library, obviously a past life thing. That library has not been around for a long time. And you've shown a lot of love this time around. And so the notion is he's been canceling whatever hate he expressed back then with the love that he's showing now. Not that that hate back then made him truly guilty, but he was carrying feelings of guilt somewhere deep in his mind. And he can let all that go because look, he's done the opposite now.
And that even affected presumably his career choice. So Louis, Helen's husband, was a dealer of rare books. The Alexandrian Library was the repository of ancient wisdom that caught fire many times. If he had some role in that, who knows? But if he had some role in that he was feeling guilty about, that he was carrying into this lifetime, then could his choice of being a rare books dealer, preserving ancient books, be to pay off his karmic debt from
Maybe
previous
so.
transgressions? And I mean, we can't know that, but it's just really interesting to speculate
And
about.
it's
And
also
how much
kind
of
of,
that's going on in our own lives?
I mean, it's interesting. Like maybe that impulse, there's an impulse in him. If I sell antique books and preserve them, I'm kind of canceling it out. But Jesus didn't say you can stop, or have Helen say or pray, you can stop punishing yourself for that because you've preserved a lot of antique books this time around. It
Yeah.
was because you've shown a lot of love this time around. That's what cancels the past.
Oh, that's hilarious. It's not
Yeah.
because he preserved antique wisdom where he possibly burned it before. So this highlights an emphasis in the course, which is our capacity to make different choices in the present. And the present in the course is what it's all about. And this is probably why Jesus is so reticent to talk about reincarnation, right?
Well, yeah, he says that in the section on reincarnation in the manual for teachers. There's in basically talking about why people shouldn't teach reincarnation as a part of the course's thought system, which we're kind of bordering on right now. Um, he says the emphasis of this course always remains the same. It is at this moment that complete salvation is offered you, and it is at this moment that you can accept it. And that brings to my mind this dream that Helen had years and years before the course, but Jesus referenced it in the course dictation. So in the dream, it's called the recorder. And there's this old man, and he's keeping a ledger of everyone's deeds. Okay. And Helen is like, hey, how's my ledger looking? Like, could you maybe give me a little preview? How's it going to turn out? And then he has this response that's really great. He says, I never indulge in speculation. In my work, it would be a waste of time. Over and over, I've seen a person suddenly decide to do something very unexpected, something that changes the whole picture of his accounts. He's quite likely to do it up until the very last minute. And then Jesus later referenced that and basically said that her dream about the recorder was remarkably accurate because it came partly from ego repressed knowledge. So that's very much along the lines of his teaching. You can always make a different choice. Right now, you can change your whole accounts. So that freedom to choose something different than the past is at the heart of the course's teachings.
Yeah, but it also feels like he's trying to have it both ways because he's saying your past choices do matter. They affect your personality, they affect the karmic deeds you have to make up for, and they don't really matter. And you can always make another choice right now. So, how do you thread that needle between those two things?
Well, I think it's a hard needle to thread. He is trying to have it both ways. Um, but I think what he would say is that you're carrying guilt over those past deeds that you don't have to carry. It's not valid guilt. Those were just mistakes. And B, even when those choices lay down certain personality patterns, we can make a new choice in the present. And that's what Helen did and Bill did in that conversation in 65 about there must be another way. In that moment, they were stepping out of their past patterns, right? That they've been in each other's throats for 8 years by this point, and presumably, if Helen's memories were accurate, many millennia before that. That laid down a strong pattern, but the whole course is about stepping outside of that. We can make a fresh choice now.
And the course is As I'm always saying, often asking us to hold two things that seem paradoxical as true at the same time. And this is just another one of those things. You, the past doesn't matter, and there is a way in which the past affects the present. We're just gonna have to
Right.
live with the fact that both of those things are true.
And I think just one more quick response to that whole issue. What he says is it's not the past that affects the present, it's your carrying of it. So those past choices to lay down certain hateful patterns, those past choices in he says the past in itself doesn't have the power to create the present or future. It's our carrying of it that affects us now.
I'm so glad you made that distinction because it's so true. Some people don't give two thoughts about the past. They just let it go and past is over. It can touch me not. And then there are others, and I'm more in this category, that just feel chained to it and can't let it go. And what's the difference between those two people? Just how they're carrying it. It's not the events of the past themselves, it's the way we hold them in our mind. And the
Right.
course has a lot to say about that. So, do you want to go into it?
Yeah, I mean, the course is all about freedom from the past. We do feel chained to the past, even when we've forgotten it from, from whatever past we had before this lifetime. We don't remember that. Most of us don't. Something in us still feels chained to it. And so much of the course is all about how the past is over. The past is unreal. There's a great line in that question of karma section that says the soul has no history. So you think of your soul as having traveled through time, oftentimes we think of it as having traveled through past lives. He's saying your soul has no history. And then the quote continues, being the same yesterday, today, and always. So the course's teaching is so much about not seeing the present in light of the past, but seeing the present as something new that is in its real nature free of the past. We're carrying the past, but in the present, it really is free of the past. And so there's a great line that's been very influential for me that is in the CE. It's also in the Cameo 15 about Edgar Cayce. So Jesus said about Edgar Cayce in his readings, he looked to the past for an explanation of the present, but he never succeeded in separating the past from the present. So we're constantly thinking the past explains the present. Jesus is saying, no, separate the past from the present. In the present, realize you are inherently free of the past if you can only kind of recognize that truth.
And right before that quote you just read on the soul, he says, even my personal history, this is Jesus talking about himself, even my personal history is of no value to you, except as it teaches you, I can help you now. So he's not even into his own past. He's interested in what happens now. And I love that idea. I also love the idea that he says that he has completely forgiven us for all of our own misdeeds in the past. He says, I've forgiven you. And that means that all hurt and hate you have ever expressed is canceled. Now,
That's huge.
that is
That's
huge
huge.
because what it means is that whatever hate and hurt we've expressed in this lifetime, whatever hate or hurt from previous lifetimes, it doesn't matter. It's canceled. And again, coming back to that idea of freedom, mental freedom, we should keep that in mind because there's so much guilt that we feel about our own lovelessness, about disappointing God, disappointing Jesus, being a failure as a course student, like all of that. We can just let it go. And every moment is new. And that's a really, really big idea.
Yeah, that is huge.
Um, you know, one thing I want to talk about here is the way in which we love to dive into our past lives. We get past life readings. We hire people to presumably tell us about who we were. We want to dive into that to explain different traits that we have in the present. And again, he's not interested in that. It's like, even my own personal history is of no value. And
He says it can be valuable, but he's very ambivalent.
well, let me just tell you where I'm going with this, because I'm I'm not opposed to going into past lives if you have someone who has a skill for that. I think there's a lot of charlatans out there, but if you have someone who has a skill for it, by all means. But there's two directions that can happen. One is if you find out that you have a past life where you've been tortured and abused and whatnot. I had a past life reading where it was pretty traumatic. What he said that I'd been through. And so I could very easily pick that up and say, oh, well, I am this way because the guy who gave me the past life reading says that I was a apprentice who was abused by my owner. Um,
And maybe that was
or
like paying for past sins. Maybe you got abused because you'd done some sin before that.
Well, who knows? My point is that I could, if I were different, I could pick that up and carry it with me. One reading could alter the direction of my life because I'm owning the sadness and the heaviness of that. So that's one way. Then, you were joking with me before we hit record that when you lived in Sedona, you went on a hike and met four people who claimed to be Mother Mary.
Well,
So
it was
everybody,
different times on the same trail.
it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
What does matter is that
And it was Mary Magdalene.
we've all met, God, we've all met people who are like, I was there with Jesus, or I was this great thinker, or I was Mary Magdalene or Mother Mary. And if we believe that, then we can get really puffed up about it. So this is where I
I've got
think
to I've got to tell my story really quickly. So
what
briefly,
do
I
you,
had I had a reading that
Robert?
I'm not gonna share. I'm gonna leave everybody hanging.
Okay. What do you make of this idea that if we get hooked into our past lives, it can cause us to sink or be puffed up?
Yeah, and he basically alludes to that in that section of the manual on reincarnation. He talks about pride in the past. And we've all seen that. There is this hope like you or somebody famous. Um, and I had a reading about that, which I will not share. Anyway, but he also says that the other side of it, sort of the other end of the spectrum from pride, is you can feel like you're a prisoner, especially I think of your own mistakes. Although Jesus does have that thing I mentioned earlier, where he says, as long as you remember always that you never suffered anything because of anything anyone else did, this is not dangerous. So there's a lot of emphasis in there. Always, anything, anyone. So he's really thinking, it's like how he deals with the issue of delving into your childhood in psychotherapy. He's really thinking the human mind tends to work as a prisoner of the past. And so the whole past life exploration process is going to very likely be part of that mindset.
Yeah, that's what feels important. But by all means, share your story about how your ego is puffed up about a past life and
My
demonstrate the very thing that we were just
my
talking about.
ego was never puffed up about, because I think it just is completely ridiculous and untrue. But it's fun.
You really want to share it though, so you must think that there's
No,
something like
I don't.
shareable about it.
No, I don't.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
We're almost out of time here. We've got to move on.
All right. Well, you just teased everybody now, so just
I
too
know.
quickly, you should just breeze over it.
No,
Robert got a past life reading
no, yeah, I'm not going to
where
let you tell it.
someone said he was a great philosopher in this fictitious place, and he was known as the thought, and his thinking was known from miles around, and he is was going to share that.
Well, the idea is it took place in Lemuria, and there was no Lemuria. The continents, the whole continents don't sink. So I always thought, from the moment I heard it from this guy was like a really well-known psychic. From the moment I heard it, I thought, come on. But it's a fun story.
But you kind of liked it.
I kind of liked
You
the
kind of liked it.
story. No, I just don't think it's true. But it's a fun story. Yeah, I don't think it's true.
That you like.
I like the story.
All right, let's wrap up here because we're almost out of time.
Okay.
I do think it's worth pointing out once again that reincarnation, as much as we love to dive into it for all the reasons that we're just demonstrating, is not a formal part of the course's teaching. And it's not an essential part of the course's path. And so do you just want to say anything more about that before we close?
Yeah, I think what I want to say is our big punchline. There's a reason why Jesus is down on karma in the usual sense. There's a reason why he's reticent about the concept of reincarnation, even though he alludes to it. There's a reason why he's reticent about trying to find out about our past lives, even though he says it can be helpful at times. All of that comes from the fact that his big message is that we're free of the past. Okay. One of the great lines that he gave about Edgar Cayce's teachings, and I have a whole past in the Cayce readings. He said, whenever we move from one instant to the next, the previous one no longer exists. And from the moment I first read that, it has stuck in my mind because it's so different from how we think. And it's so freeing. Whenever we move from one instant to the next, the previous one no longer exists. Twice he says in the course, the past, quote, does not matter. I think this is also why he refuses to give us some detailed explanation of how the separation happened. Because he knows how our minds work. Our minds naturally see us as the end product of the past. And so the big message that I think we can take away from this is we really are free from the past. We really can separate the past from the present. We really can make a new choice in the present. We really are a soul that has no history. And so all of that, I think, goes to the heart of what the course is teaching, which is why he moves these issues of karma and reincarnation off to the periphery.
So good. I love that part in Miracle Principle 47, the miracle is a learning device which lessens the need for time, where he talks about the horizontal versus the vertical view of time. And on the horizontal view of time, there's the past, there's the present, there's the future, there's all the things that we get tripped up in. But if you can view other people through this vertical view of time, you can view them with complete equality. You can view them as the invisible divine, you can view the invisible divine reality that is the only thing that's true about them. And you can make that the basis from which you live. And that's what he's always trying to point us towards. That's the direction he's always trying to push us towards. And so you can see why he wouldn't be all that interested in the past. But still, if we can just kind of drop the past, then we can keep that eternal view of each other that he's asking for.
Yeah, what I find, just as one last thing, I find is that as I'm trying to learn new things, as I'm trying to, sort of embody new concepts and patterns, something in my mind says, you've been doing this so long, it's kind of too late now. Like, there was a point at which you should have learned this, but that was so long ago that just forget about it. You're stuck. And the course is saying you're never stuck. It's never too late. Jesus is always willing to try again with you. And so, like, in this moment, no matter how many thousands of years you've been carrying some pattern, you can step out of it right now And that is so liberating.
That's the message that he gave to Helen. He said, there'll never be a moment when I am not willing to try again. You might be gladdened by remembering that. So you can take his advice to her.
Yeah.
And we'll end it there. So thank you, Robert. I knew I would love this conversation. It's so rich. And thank you for all the work that you've done to pull together these notes and quotes. And thank you to everyone who is joining us live. If you would like to attend one of our live Exploring A Course in Miracles podcast recordings, you're welcome to do so. We record Thursdays at 11 a.m. Eastern, and you can find the link by joining our free community at community.circleofa.org. See you next time. Bye for now.